We all have a ton of data these days. Unless you live entirely in the cloud, you probably store most of that data on a computer. Trouble is, computers are fragile. This is especially true when you factor in spinning platter hard drives, which are still the most cost-effective way to store large amounts of data. These things fail a lot though and are easily damaged if you're not careful. Sadly, we can't do much about that yet, but whilst we can't prevent the drives from failing, we can protect our data. One of my favourite ways to do that is using Unraid. So what the heck is Unraid? Welcome to Foxy's Lab. I'm Foxy, and in this series I explain complex smart home, IoT and home lab concepts in a way that makes sense. In this episode, we're talking about Unraid, an incredibly powerful operating system that makes running your home lab a breeze. So, go grab a coffee, I'll get one too, and then we'll get into it. Unraid is the Swiss Army knife of home servers. It's an operating system you install on bare metal, meaning directly on your hardware, and it gives you a super flexible way to store data, run apps, and manage virtual machines. I say install, although that's not entirely accurate, but more on that later. It's not quite like traditional RAID, hence the name. Instead of duplicating or spreading data across drives, Unraid treats each disk independently. That means if one drive fails, you don't lose everything. You just replace the failed drive, rebuild, and carry on. If you have Parity set up, you don't lose a thing. If you don't, you only lose the data that was on that failed drive. And on top of that, Unraid also has Docker and VM support, so you can run everything from your Plex server to your Home Assistant instance, Frigate, Node-RED, Grafana, or even a Windows virtual machine, all on one box. It's not free software, but it does have a free trial and licenses are very reasonable. I won't include pricing details here as they are subject to change, but I'll put a link to the pricing page for Unraid in the description. Here's a quick history. Unraid's been around for a surprisingly long time. It was actually created long ago, back in 2005. Back then, my home lab was a little more than a laptop plugged into a TV with an S-video cable, so I could watch episodes of 24 as soon as they came out in the States, because the UK used to get shows weeks, if not months after the US did. Truly, we lived in the darkest of times back then. Unraid was originally built by Tom Mortensen, who wanted a way to keep his ripped DVD collection safe from drive failures without putting up with the compromises of classic RAID setups. He called it Unraid because he saw this as the anti-RAID setup for people who wanted fast, protected network storage without the complexity that RAID can bring. It started out purely as a NAS solution, but over time, as Docker and virtualization became more accessible, Unraid evolved into a full-blown home lab OS. Today, it's maintained by Tom's company, Lime Technology, and yeah, it's still small, still scrappy, and still community driven. The forums are full of absolute wizards who could diagnose your system's log like they're reading tea leaves. Alright, let's decode some of the Unraid lingo. Buckle up, because this is going to be a long section. You're going to want a coffee for this one. The array is the heart of Unraid, literally an array of drives. In most NAS systems, this would be called a storage pool, but in Unraid, it's the array. It's where all your main data lives. Your media, your backups, your long-term storage, and all 72,000 photos of your cats. The Parity drive is basically your insurance policy. It doesn't store files as such, but it keeps enough information on them to rebuild a failed drive should anything go wrong.
We can rebuild it. We have the technology. But I don't want to spend a lot of money.
With one Parity drive, you can lose one disk and still recover everything. Add a second and you're covered for 2 drive failures, but honestly, unless you're cursed, 1 drive is usually enough. I only run a single Parity drive myself, partly because it's a tiny bit less overhead, but mostly because I'm a maverick.
He's so cool!
Then there's the cache pool, usually made up of fast solid-state drives. This is where the real work happens. Your downloads, your Docker containers, your virtual machines all typically live here. That's assuming you actually have a cache pool configured, of course, but more on that later. Now, Unraid cache isn't an automatic cache that magically decides what to move. Instead, Unraid runs something called the mover, which shifts files between your cache and your array according to the rules you set for each share. In older versions of Unraid, you see a use cache option with values like yes, no, prefer, or only. In the newer versions, this has been replaced with primary storage and secondary storage plus a separate mover action, but the concept's still the same. For example, your downloads might be set to primary on the cache, with the mover action set to move files to the array, which is the modern equivalent of the old yes setting. Whilst your app data share would be set to primary on the cache, and the mover would be told not to do anything, which is basically the old only behavior. So, cache for speed, array for storage, simple as that. Shares are your folders, but with superpowers. They can span multiple drives and you decide where each share lives. For example, media can stay on the array while downloads can live on the cache. If you're new to network attached storage, then you will love this feature as it means you're not limited by the size of a single drive. Even if the folder lives on multiple drives, it'll still only be a single share that you need to access, which makes management a breeze. Now, there's one share that deserves a special mention, and that's the appdata share. This is where all of your container configurations and databases live. basically the brains of your Docker setup. Keep it on your cache or a fast SSD drive on the array if you haven't got a cache, and make sure it's not constantly bouncing between the cache and the array. If you lose your appdata folder, you don't lose the files that are on your array, but you'll spend ages rebuilding your containers and it's a huge faff. Each share also has something called an allocation method. That's just Unraid's way of deciding which drives to write new files to. The default, called high water, fills one drive halfway and then moves on to the next. This keeps things balanced without spinning up the whole array every time you save a file. Still with me? Okay, next up, file systems. When you add drives to the array, Unraid typically formats them as XFS for the main array, with btrfs or ZFS commonly used for pools. As of Unraid 7.2, you can also use drives formatted in other formats like NTFS or exFAT, for example. This is a huge win, as now when you first build an array, you can slot in your existing data drives and keep the data visible and shareable in Unraid without reformat. Before this, adding a drive to Unraid meant losing any data that was already on the drive, which made migrating to Unraid from an existing server with a lot of data a logistical nightmare. If you don't really know much about file systems, or you don't have any existing data drives to preserve, stick with the defaults. They're the defaults for a reason. The Docker image file gets mentioned a lot during troubleshooting advice. Think of it as Docker's sandbox. It's where all your container layers and binaries live. If it ever gets corrupted, Unraid can rebuild it, but doing so will remove every Docker container from your system. Don't worry though, your actual data and configs live safely in the appdata and on the array, so they won't be affected. Still, it's very much a measure twice, delete once situation. The boot drive is the USB stick that Unraid runs on.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I did say runs on, not installs from. Unraid doesn't actually install itself onto your computer. It runs from that USB stick like a Linux Live CD, which honestly I try not to think too hard about because it gives me palpitations. It stores itself in RAM and then accesses the config files from that drive, so if your drive goes kaput, so does your system. You'll be okay until you reboot, or until Unraid needs to read or write from that config, but at this point it's a Schrodinger's server, both alive and dead at the same time. The config folder contains all of your system settings, disk assignments, shares, Docker templates, everything. Back that folder up occasionally. If your USB dies, that backup will save you from a complete resetup. If you are set up to use Unraid cloud services, which they call Unraid Connect, which sounds like a network event to me, but whatever, then you can get it to back your USB drive up automatically, which is honestly the only way I can sleep at night. Finally, there's the Docker and VM managers, which are really the core of the modern Unraid philosophy. It's what lets you run all your apps and even full operating systems right from the web interface. No command line to wrestle with, and there are no separate apps, just a friendly web UI that does all the heavy lifting for you. And if you use the Community Applications plugin, which you'll be prompted to install when you first click on the Apps tab, you'll get access to a huge library of pre-configured containers and plugins that makes setting things up a breeze. Here's one of Unraid's party tricks: drives. You can throw in whatever you've got, different sizes, brands, ages, and it'll use them sensibly. Start small and add single disks as you go. If a disk dies, you'll only rebuild that one disk and the rest stays readable. No faffing about choosing a strict RAID level up front. If, like me, you have a box of spare drives hanging around, you could just shove them all into your Unraid server if you were so inclined. And as of 7.2, you can even do that without losing any of the existing data. I use Unraid as the foundation of my home lab. It's where I run all the key parts of my setup, things like Frigate for my CCTV cameras, Node-RED for automation, and things like Mosquito, Plex, Home Assistant. My entire smart home is very much powered by Unraid. I've even got a handful of Telegram bots that I made years ago that are still running today. I even have Unraid running on a single drive NUC, which is what runs my smart home containers. This isn't what it's designed for at all, but the Docker management interface is second to none for me. If I'm using Docker for anything, I want that Unraid interface to be available. Tom, if you're watching, please make a standalone Docker Manager app. I'd install it on everything. I will admit that I no longer use Unraid for VMs, as I have a dedicated Proxmox server for that now, but I've used VMs on Unraid many times in the past, and it's one of the best VM interfaces I've ever used. Honestly, the only reason I am using Proxmox is that Proxmox is free for my use case and Unraid is not, and I've run out of licenses, so if Unraid wants to sponsor me at any point, I'll gladly put it on every server in my house. Now, despite it being very user-friendly, Unraid isn't foolproof, so let's talk about some of the things that will bite you if you're not careful. Welcome to the gotchas. Watch your step. As I mentioned earlier, Unraid terrifyingly boots from a USB stick, and yeah, that stick will die eventually. Honestly, this is the only part of Unraid that I genuinely dislike. I would much prefer to install it on an NVMe drive or something that was a bit more robust than a thumb drive. However, Unraid Connect does have the option to back your USB drive up automatically, so honestly, it's probably not as big a deal as it sounds. Plus, whilst the idea is scary, I've actually not had a thumb drive fail on me yet, and I've had some servers running literally for years. I do keep a spare brand new USB in a drawer though, just in case. If you're like me and you move servers around a lot, make sure your spare is unused, because once you transfer an Unraid license to a new drive, the old drive gets deactivated and is effectively blacklisted. I've got a drawer full of ex-Unraid drives, so keeping a sealed backup just makes life easier. Misconfigure your shares and your cache pool will fill up quicker than a kettle under a waterfall. And when your cache hits 100%, Docker containers start crashing, VMs can corrupt, and the whole system starts to struggle a bit.
I'm tired, boss.
Set your cache usage up wisely. Mover schedules exist for a reason. I've fallen foul of this numerous times. Most recently when I had foolishly misconfigured some masks in Frigate and it captured literally thousands of videos in the space of a couple of hours. My 500GB CCTV cache didn't know what hit it and suddenly Docker was refusing to start new containers. If your containers ever start acting weird, don't panic. Deleting and rebuilding your Docker image file can fix a lot of problems, but it's very much a Hail Mary. Don't jump straight to it. Go through the normal troubleshooting first, but if nothing else works, this last-ditch move will usually sort it. Fair warning though, doing this wipes every single Docker container on your server. It's basically the equivalent of killing a spider by burning your house down. The good news is, your actual configuration data lives in the appdata folder, so once you re-download and reconfigure your containers, everything should return to how it was before. Parity is not backup. Let me say that again, as it's vitally important that you understand this. Parity is not backup. Make that your new mantra. Parity protects against drive failure, not human error or data corruption. If you delete something, it's gone. If a file becomes corrupted, Parity will not allow you to recover it. So use proper backups, preferably off-site, preferably scheduled. If you have files that are of high value, then I suggest you use the 3-2-1 method, which means keep 3 copies with 2 different storage methods with 1 copy off-site. Now this is very much a do as I say, not as I do situation, because honestly, I don't follow this advice myself. Thankfully, there's not much that's mission critical on my servers. Oh, bugger, I'm a YouTuber now, aren't I? Well, I guess I do need to start backing things up properly. Ooh, I can make that into a video. Drop a comment if you want to see me implement backups. Whilst we're on the topic of Parity, your Parity drives can only back up drives that are up to the same size as the drive itself. If you have an 8TB Parity drive and you stick a new 15TB drive in there, the 15TB drive will not be Parity protected. Make sure your Parity drive is at least the same capacity as your largest drive, otherwise you're setting yourself up for failure. Don't overcommit resources. It's tempting to just wildly assign CPU cores and RAM to the VMs, but remember, even though that's only the maximum resource they can use, if they're all doing stuff at once, it could easily eat all the resources on your machine. Lastly, a new one for version 7.2. Whilst you can add existing data drives to Unraid now, be careful about adding them to an existing Parity protected array. If you do that, your data's gone for good. Your best bet is to create a brand new array on that server. I'll link to a video where they do this in the description. Don't worry though, you're not starting from scratch. You're just telling Unraid that this is a new configuration of drives and that the Parity needs to be rebuilt from scratch. So as long as you're careful, you won't lose any data. Just a bit of a fiddly process. If you're enjoying this video, give me a like and hit subscribe. If you're already running Unraid, tell us all what you're running on your server in the comments. It's always fun and inspiring to hear what others are rocking on their home labs. Okay, let's get into the rules. Rule 1. Use your cache drives appropriately. Keep your app data, domains, and system shares on your cache pool and make sure they're cache only or cache prefer. That's where Docker and your VMs actually live. They're like speed. SSDs are fast, spinning disks are not. It's that simple. If you don't have a cache, make sure your pool has at least 1 SSD in it and assign the app data share to use only that drive. Rule 2. Don't let your cache fill up. When it hits 100%, things start getting weird. It's getting weird! Dockers crash, VMs corrupt, and Unraid starts having palpitations of its own. Set a minimum free space so it never happens. Give the poor thing room to breathe.
I just need some rest. Thanks.
Rule 3. Choose a sane allocation method and split level. Use high water. It spreads data evenly without hammering every drive at once. Rule 4. Pick the right file system for the job. Use XFS for your array drives. It's boring but reliable, and btrfs or ZFS for cache. I'd probably stick with btrfs myself, as that's generally the preferred format in Unraid, although if you Google btrfs versus ZFS in Unraid, you'll probably find 1 or 2 arguments. If you've got existing data on an existing drive, you'll probably find you can just pop that in and use whatever file system is on there already. Rule 5. When moving app data between the array and the cache, stop Docker and your VMs first. Seriously. If you don't, Unraid will happily leave half your files in one place and half in the other, and then you'll spend hours wondering why nothing works anymore. Honestly though, just leave it on the cache. It'll perform better that way anyway. Unless your array's all SSDs, in which case do what you like. I'm not your dad. If you're just starting out with Unraid, I highly recommend you visit the channels of SpaceInvaderOne and IbraCorp. They are Unraid masters and taught me 90% of everything I know about Unraid. I popped a link to both channels in the description. So that's Unraid. A powerful, flexible way to run your home server without needing a rack full of enterprise gear or a Cisco certification. It's easy enough for new home labbers to be able to get up and running quickly, whilst being scalable and powerful enough that you won't regret using it once you've got it all mastered. If you're running multiple smart home apps, media servers, or just like the idea of total control over your digital world, Unraid might just be your new best friend. What the Heck is an ongoing series where I explain the ins and outs of tech. I try to post a new video every Monday, so if you want to be notified when the next episode drops, hit the bell and YouTube will make sure you're kept in the loop. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've started thinking about the Unraid boot drive again and I need to go for a little lie down. Ta-ra.